a very good evening to you, and welcome to this evening's edition of Politics 101, Thursday evening. I'd like to welcome all of you down to the program. If you're joining us from Guyana, welcome. I know there is blackout. There's blackout, around most of Georgetown. We're expecting two guests tonight, Vincent, Alexander, and Amanza, Walton. Vincent is backstage and ready to go. Amanza apparently still has blackout. Welcome to Politics. Welcome to Politics 101. Politics 101, welcome. And Thursday night, we're going to be talking about human rights tonight. We're going to be talking about human rights tonight. As you know, the Guyana government has been appearing before the UN Human Rights Ctee out of Geneva, and they've been having a torrid time. Gail Teixeira has been answering or attempting to answer questions posed by the committee, and quite a torrid time. And they covered a range of human rights issues, from extrajudicial killing to ethnic discrimination to corruption. And what's been so impressive about the hearing is the committee seems to be well informed about the developments in Guyana. And as I've been saying all week, sometimes we feel that our struggle is not gaining the attention of the world. But as I pointed out, Guyana is now a different country. We are the fastest growing petrol state in the world. And I've been reliably informed by Professor Thomas, the fastest growing petrol state of all time. And you're not going to be the fastest growing petrol state, and nobody pays attention to what's happening in your country. And so when we see Guyana being hauled before the Human Rights Commission and being grilled in such a serious way, it should give us pause for us to realize that our country has changed. Our country is no longer the little teeny country located somewhere in the northern tip of North America where nobody pays attention. Oh no, our country has changed. And so what you see there, what you saw there in Geneva this week, is a reflection of how much Guyana has now gone into the big league. And so we are going to talk to Vincent, and hopefully Amanza will join us if the current comes on where she is. Welcome to Politics 101. If you're joining us outside of Guyana, a very good evening to you. If you're joining us from North America, a very good night to you if you are joining us from Europe. And those of you who are joining us from across the border in Suriname and French Guyana, special welcome to you. Those of you who join us across the Caribbean, special welcome to the people joining us from Antigua, Green Bay. I noticed quite a few of our viewers are from Green Bay area in Antigua, Green Bay. So if you join us from Antigua and Barbuda, Antigua, in Green Bay area, special welcome to you. Special welcome to you. Special welcome to our viewers who are joining us from St. Kitts Nevis. St. Kitts Nevis. And those of you who are joining us from the Bahamas. Yes, Green Bay in the house. Antigua. Guyana is playing the Windward Islands in Antigua, and they are in the ascendancy. There's, the 4-day competition is being played. They're not playing in Guyana because the stadium is undergoing repairs to be ready for the World Cup in a couple of months. And so therefore Guyana is playing all its games outside of Guyana. What a shame. I always feel that it was the worst mistake when they rendered border to be useless. Once they built the stadium, then a historic border was allowed to deteriorate. And it bothers me that we're in the 24th century, and sometimes we don't think 24th century. We don't think 24th century. So we allowed border to deteriorate. And so the stadium is not ready. And we can't play any first-class cricket in Guyana because that's the only game in town, the only stadium. What a shame. What a shame. What a shame. Historic border was not upkept. And I don't think it's too late for the government to get together with the GCC and to restore border to its former glory and to have first-class cricket and international cricket being played again at border. It's one of the things that I think the opposition ought to be thinking about as they contemplate elections and getting back into office. But yes, Guyana is playing the Windward Islands in Antigua, and they're doing well. I think they went into the end of play. Guyana were, I think, 360 runs ahead with 9 wickets still standing. Bowling down the Windwards for 113. A young sensation as Isaiah Thorne, fast like lightning, 4 for 37. At one time he had 4 for 11, really blown away. Very quick. Really, when you think of Shamar Joseph and young Isaiah Thorne coming through now and Alzari Joseph, I think we may be, one has to be cautious when you're talking about West Indies cricket. We may be getting back to the time when fast bowling is a weapon. Guyana alone, I mean, when if all our fast bowlers are available and fit for Guyana, I don't know if they'll be able to play all of them in one team. You're talking about Shamar Joseph, Isaiah Thorne, young Isaiah Thorne. He's just 19 years old, and I watched him today. Quick. Romario Shepherd and Kimo Paul and Niall Smith and Runsford Beaton. If all of them are available at the same time, we won't have space for all our fast bowlers just in Guyana alone. So some good news there for cricket lovers. Welcome to all the bookers who are joining us. Welcome to all the Buxtonians in the house, whether you're joining us from in Buxton or Brooklyn, which, as we say, is going from Buxton to Brooklyn, is like going from Buxton to Annandale. Welcome to all of you. Those of you who join us from the south, from Atlanta, Georgia, welcome to Politics 101. We're going to be discussing tonight. Tonight, we are going to be discussing that issue, the human rights hearings. And we saw the Guyana government being grilled quite aggressively. And we noticed that the president, I haven't listened to the vice president's press conference yet. I saw the first 15 minutes, but I've had a chance to listen. But they're already crying. I think they're saying that the committee was entrapped or fell into a trap by the opposition, something like that. But as I said, Guyana is no longer a little teeny bit country. We are big. We used to say in the old days that Jamaica was the small country with a big name. Well, Guyana will now join Jamaica in that league, a small country with a big name. And it is all because of us transitioning into a petro state. And the last 2 nights I've been talking about our challenges as we move into another election. And that our elections are no longer going to be elections, local elections in terms of Guyana. Who governs in Guyana is the interest not just of Guyanese, is the interest of other forces, hemispheric forces, regional forces, international forces. Welcome to Politics 101. I hope we are getting the drift. We are getting the drift of what we're talking about. But because I think our opposition leaders, some of them, some of you will say most of them, and a lot of our supporters have been slow to appreciate the new Guyana and to anchor our analysis, our plans within the context of the new Guyana. And so when we saw what we saw in Geneva this past week, it's really a reflection of how much our country is changing. And we are doing so within the first half a decade of oil. We started to pump oil in 2019. And it's not even 5 years yet. And that is why we're saying we're the fastest growing petrol state in the world. And perhaps, as Professor Thomas is saying, is the fastest growing petrol state of all time. We are then located in the larger geopolitics. As we would say when I was a boy growing up, we're now in the big league. We're now in the big league. Some of you will say, well, we're in the big league for the wrong reason. Yes, we are a changed country. We are the fastest growing economy in the world. We are within the first 10 largest deposits of oil. And we have problems with managing the petrol state. That's where the problem is. But we cannot deny any longer that we are a petrol state, and it comes with certain consequences. And so, the United Nations Human Rights Commission has put the spotlight on Guyana. Very well informed, very well informed. Welcome to all of you. Welcome to all of you. Welcome to you, Vashti. Welcome to you, Everett. Everett is a regular. Thank you all so much. Those of you who said you enjoyed the program for the last 2 nights, as we try to put in perspective. We try to put in perspective our Guyana. And someone said, our posing of the question, you know, as we said last night and the night before, you know, if we go to an election with the present machinery, electoral machinery, we are walking into an election that is most likely rigged against the opposition. But if we don't contest the election, the possibilities that the PPP would get 65 seats in parliament. So we have that dilemma. A rigged electoral machinery, and then the possibility of not going to an election that if you go to an election with the rigged election machinery, you're starting behind. You're running the risk of losing before you start. And if you don't go to the election, you run the risk of giving the PPP 65 seats. See the dilemma we are in? And they're talking about rigged election. In 2006, the PPP held on to a seat that belonged to the AFC. Who is the rigger? I know the man, you know the man. In 2011, they were about to rig a seat in Southern Georgetown thanks to the man who is coming on tonight, Vincent Alexander. God bless him. They didn't get to rig the 2011 election. Talk about rigging. Talk about attempting to rig. And you hear responsible citizens talking about the attempt to rig 2011, 2020 election. And they forget what happened in 2000. Let's not forget, they don't mention it. And what more brazen attempt to rig an election than what they were trying to do in 2011? And Vincent Alexander always say one thing. What happened in 2011 is that ultimately the results got to go to the commission to sign off. So even if they try to attempt to rig and all that kind of thing, ultimately it would go to the commission. And it's when it went to the commission that Vincent Alexander caught them. In 2020, they never allowed the results to go to the commission. If they were so certain that the coalition was rigging, let it go to the commission and let the commission catch them like how Vincent Alexander caught them in 2011. Yet, Stabrook News, Kaitro News, all the civil society, they're talking about rigged election, but they don't talk about 2011. They don't talk about 2006. And I don't want to go back to 1997. And Donald Ramatar continues to say that the coalition rigged the 2015 election because he wanted the box to open. He wanted some boxes to open. Vincent is here tonight. He knows the story better than me. Welcome to Politics 101. And I think we're ready to go. We are ready to go. Vincent is here. Please share the link. Some of you have already shared it. Others of you, please share the link because tonight's program is very important. Mr. Alexander. Good evening.
Good evening.
You're a big boy for me for a couple of years, but I think we are grow match. We've been hearing about blackout since in the days when we were underdeveloped, coming out of colonialism, trying to get our infrastructure together. We were dealing with structural things like blackout and so on. Here we are 60-something years after independence. We are now the fastest growing petrol state. Dr. Thomas has told me it's the fastest growing petrol state ever. Given the time we started to pump oil and where we are now, no petrol state in the history of the world has grown as fast as we have grown. Yet, blackout continues to plague us. You have earned the right to reflect and pronounce on something like that. What's wrong with us? What's wrong with us? Shadow never won a Calypso crown until the year 2000. And in the year 2000, he won the crown by singing a Calypso. What's wrong with me? And am I ugly or what? Am I bad lucky or what? What's wrong with me?
If we're talking about blackouts, I think that we ought to draw a graph because though historically we have been affected by blackouts, I don't think that this period could be compared with others for more than one reason. One, we now have more resources to throw behind these problems. Yet we are throwing more resources. Bear in mind that in end of last year, I think they brought in some 17 units. They said that that would resolve the problem in terms of our output. And I am advised that of the 17 units they brought in, most, if not all, have not really performed. Some second-hand units they bought somewhere in Latin America. And this is an occurrence we have faced with twice. I don't know how many people know that just about the time when the government changed, there was the intervention of the vice president who sought to bring in units from Miami at that time. And that did not solve the problem either. So we've had two instances where they have brought in units totally to solve the problem, and they have not solved the problem. The units themselves have not done the job that they were supposed to do. Separate from a part of the fact that you have issues with the manpower who are in charge of the industry. It can well be argued that the Jamaican guy who was here during the APNU AFC period was doing a pretty good job. And there were signs of a turnaround in terms of GPL. No sooner the government changed, he was axed, and the field manager prior to him was brought back. And therefore, the failure continued, including the fact that for a long period, the field manager was not managing because of ill health, but was still being paid. So really, we are affected in terms of competence. Undoubtedly, there are issues related to why certain generators are purchased, from where they are purchased, and who direct that they be purchased. So that it is the general problem we have with our infrastructure. Whilst Guyana is throwing a lot of money behind infrastructure, and nobody can doubt that quite a bit is being thrown behind infrastructure, the issues are we getting bank for a dollar? There's so much corruption that affects almost every contract in this country. We're not getting bank for a dollar. And not only are we not getting bank for a dollar in terms of the money being creamed off at the very inception of transactions due to corruption, but we also have serious problems with during the projects, the quality of work that we're receiving. I have had instances where I have spoken with people who are actually um, on the jobs, and some of them are foreigners, and they would tell you that we are not getting bang for dollar. If we have to mix cement and there's a particular standard required, let's say you're making cement blocks and you have to throw 5 wheelbarrows of sand to a sack of cement, we probably be throwing 8 wheelbarrows of sand to the sack of cement,
Oh.
so that we are under, we operating below par in the interest of siphoning off the funds. So incompetence, corruption, and the lack of foresight are the things which are affecting GPL, as they're affecting all of our sectors, all of our productive sectors. Decisions are not being made that are professionally made. There's a lot of political intervention in the decision making, and the political intervention has a lot to do with ensuring who gets the contracts and how much is creamed off of the contracts, etc., etc. So GPL, yes, we've had GPL, we've had problems, but I think if you were to do a graph in terms of the inputs and the outputs, I think this is the worst period we've ever had
The
in
worst
terms
period,
of the performance
the worst period we've ever
of
had.
GPL.
Yeah. Retrogression rather than progression. My goodness me. One would say things like electricity. Those are basic things. By now, I mean, those are basic things. Basic things. Vincent Alexander here tonight, and we are going to be talking, for the most part, about the hearings before the United Nations Committee on Human Rights. Please share the link. Welcome to all of you. Sherry Jeffrey joining us from Antigua. A few of you are joining us from Antigua. Yes, there's a critical mass of viewers and followers from Green Bay, Antigua. I would like to welcome you all to the program. And it's our Caribbean. It's our Caribbean. It's our Caribbean. There was a time when, and there is coming a time now when others are going to be drawn to Guyana. There was a time when others came to Guyana, and we're arriving at a point now where others are coming to Guyana again. So the movement of Jah people, Exodus, as Bob Marley refers to it, our people have always been moving across our region. That's nothing new in our Caribbean, and that is why I don't refer to the Caribbean as the diaspora, because I think it's the Caribbean, and we are always part of the Caribbean. Vincent, put on your historian hat here. Has there been a time before where we have had this level of scrutiny of Guyana from the United Nations Human Rights Commission?
I would say no. We have not had this level of scrutiny before. Suffice to say that the level we now have, and I think it's a gradual build-up. It's not a one-off. We have to go back, for example, to the McDougall report in 2009.
Yes.
We have to go back to the people of African descent recommendations, which were somewhere in 2017. So there's been a build-up. So whilst we haven't had it before, it hasn't come like a one-off. It's something that's gradually built up. And the build-up has had to do with the manner in which internally we have continued to be on the watch list in terms of our human rights performance. So we've attracted this attention by virtue of what's been happening. And not only have we attracted this attention, but I would dare say that there's been more vigilance internally as well. I think in the past, a very large extent, the Guyana Human Rights Committee was the sole body that was interacting on these matters. But I think you have more actors now. And now that you have more actors, you could hear Mr. Shearer saying that there is some cabal of organizations that are dominating the space. But the fact of the matter is that you have a wider involvement of civil society, whether it's the APA, whether it's the recent extractive industries body, whether it's a PADA G, whether the Human Rights Committee has continued. There are far greater involvement that's taken place, and more attention is being paid to human rights in Guyana. So, for example, if you look at the PADA G, for example, there is the Permanent Forum for the People of African Descent, which is a part of the Human Rights Committee. And we have not missed any of those meetings. We've been able to go to those meetings and make representations. Interestingly, when the first forum was held, the first session of the Permanent Forum, there was a no-show of the government of Guyana. Absolutely no show. As if they didn't care. When the second session was held, again, Again, there was a no-show of the government of Guyana, except that when PPP held what is referred, they sent some of the diplomats to monitor the side event. It's not until we came to the UN session last year in New York that they sent a delegation, I think a 3 or 4 man delegation. They sent the chairman of the Ethics Relations Commission, they sent Minister Walton, and they sent Kafra from the Ethnic Relations Commission as
Yes.
well. And they were largely going there to be responsive, because the fact of the matter is that Guyana had not submitted the required reports in keeping with the requirement of the decade. The people of African descent, they had not submitted the reports. Of course, it was not being reported because the government of Guyana has not had a program in response to the declaration which they signed on to.
To the declaration which they signed on to. Donna is saying that there is blackout right now in Tocqueville. That is up the road there from you, Vincent.
I am in blackout. It's
You,
just my own little other arrangements that's making it possible
that
for me
make
to
it
have
possible
some.
for you to be on tonight.
Yeah.
Amanza Walton is supposed to be on, but she's deep in blackout too. So it's right across Georgetown. And thanks to those of you who are still joining us despite blackout, and thanks to Vincent for joining us. Vincent, you would have paid attention to the hearings, and so I'll give you a chance to start where you want to start. Obviously, you're going to start because there are some areas there that are of interest to you or areas in which you work. Of course, epidemiology and the question of ethnic discrimination. I think they touched on the issue of GCOM and so forth. So start where you want to in terms of the government response and the questioning from the panel.
All right. First of all, I want to say that what we're seeing now is not the first in terms of reports and required responses.
Mm-hmm.
As I just said, Padaji had been attending a certain fora and had been submitting its own reports. And what we saw recently was when we submitted a report, there was a 110-page response by the government.
Right.
So that wouldn't have been publicized the way these hearings are being publicized. But running through the response, we're seeing the same trend. That is that the government are responding by being very blatant in terms of the untruths that they're using in their responses. I'm trying to use parliamentary language.
Yes.
The untruths that are founded in the responses, but there are also positions that they take which are not necessarily untruths, but which are revelations as to their disposition. And so, for example, in the 110-page response, they sought to indicate that one of the problems with the people of African descent was that they inflicted some harm on themselves, for which the government or no state was responsible. And so, for example, they spoke about the people of African descent abandoning their village lands.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
As if to say that this was a bad economic decision, which is now affecting the people of African descent. They did not give recognition to the fact that the people of African descent were faced with problems that were state initiated problems in terms of their lands. You know, the flooding that took place by the estates that made it difficult for them to meaningfully involve in agriculture. The kind of taxes that were imposed by the state that made it difficult for them to have the resources to engage in their agricultural activities. And now the government is saying to the UN, these people have a problem. They abandoned their lands. Other people made wiser decisions. For example, they said that we didn't go for rice farming, which isn't exactly true. We didn't go for rice farming, which was what would have allowed us to be able to enter the market and to make money. But we went for provision farming, which wasn't economical. Now, obviously, we were trying to feed ourselves, and that's the first thing one has to do. But they criticized that decision, so that there's a lot in their own disposition, a lot in their own disposition, where as a government, they are revisionists. They're not taking responsibility for the history of this country and how uh, transformation can take place and how equitable measures can be used to bring people out of the dirt and the rot that they're in. Rather, they're saying they have a problem, they cause their problem. We have a society where everybody has an equal opportunity, and so we don't have anything specific that we need to do for the people of African descent. That's the kind of response that they have. And they're having this response in the context of a period of reparations, a period when the president and the vice president and all of them beyond the boundary, beyond the boundary, are speaking about reparations. But what they're speaking about when they talk about reparations, and they appear very patriotic and, you know, very nationalistic, they're talking about reparations in relation to pre-emancipation.
Mhm.
And the story I just told you, that's how they see post-emancipation.
Yeah.
So the state has no responsibility in any way for anything post-emancipation. It's pre-emancipation. And they are not addressing the decade where the world, the UN, and we in Guyana have come to the conclusion that there are institutional and legal arrangements that continue to disadvantage the people of African descent. And unless you address those, then in fact, the people of African descent will continue to be disadvantaged. And their claim is that they don't have such problems. Now, building on that situation are acts of human rights violations, which are what the UN, to a very large extent, is focusing on in these series of hearings that we have seen. They are focusing on the now, what is happening now. And so, what is happening now, we see, for example, that there are serious issues in terms of the way in which police has conducted itself. And very often one can show that there's a direct intervention of the political forces in the manner of conduct of the police from two perspectives. One, the way in which they have sought to appoint persons to head the force, who obviously carry out their agenda and their vendetta, and so that's one element. And the way in which the police themselves have conducted uh, themselves as a political response. So you have situations like the Boston matter, where this guy was in his bed, asleep with his wife, and his house was invaded by the police, and he was shot there. And this is not new. This follows on the Shaka Blair matter, which took place in the late 90s, where he too was asleep in his bed. And they came, took him out of his bed, took him to another room in the house in Buxton, and shot him. So the point I'm making in that regard is that there are trends in terms of the human rights violations. There are trends. It's not one-off things that are occurring. And that's one of the reasons why Um, we're getting the amount of attention we're getting because people beyond our shores have been able to recognize that there are trends. These are not isolated incidents. So we have the problem there with the manner in which the police have gone after persons. And we have not only the police, but we have the extrajudicial killings, which have involved the police on one hand
Mm-hmm.
and others. And there's so much evidence out there about the way in which others have been involved in extrajudicial killings, you know, and one only has to decipher what the vice president said at the death uh, ceremony, the burial, the funeral ceremony for Roger Luncheon, to understand the extent to which what occurred knowing to the government and probably sponsored by the government. Certainly, if one goes back to the Bacchus situation where those two brothers died, the one who came forward and brought evidence, irrefutable evidence of the minister's involvement in the death squad, and the way in which he died, and then his brother died, and then you have a situation where when these deaths occur, no coroner's inquest is held. Our laws provide for a coroner inquest to be held um, when there are such deaths to determine, the nature of the death and what kind of action should be taken. But we have a situation where absolutely no coroner inquest is held, and so there seems to be absolutely no value attached to the lives, and these are largely lives of people of African descent. On the one hand, they're gunned down, and on the other hand, when they're killed, there's no coroner inquest. It's as if, well, the death is deserved. So here is what we've been asked to answer for. What we've been asked to answer for, and the way in which these answers have been proffered is very shabby and very diabolic, because there can be no real answers that can justify the actions which have been taken and the atrocities which have been committed and associated uh, with the state. With the state, we have the big question of inclusion, and what we find Ms. Teixeira saying every time she's asked a question, she rattles off a range of laws that are in place. She rattles off a range of laws. Guyana is not the laws. The problem in Guyana is the enforcement of the laws.
Yep.
And so while she can make these reference about all these laws that they have put in place, the enforcement, there are serious problems with the enforcement. We have seen the manner in which SOCU has conducted itself, and that's another area where questions were raised, the manner in which SOCU has conducted itself. And so they're involved in enforcement, but we see the enforcement is unrelated to what they were really uh, established for, and that they literally use as a political tool. We see the man from SOCU turning up when Slow, a citizen, had been charged and went to the court to hear his charge. Here is the man from SOCU turning up, trying to handcuff and put Slow into the lockup at that time, when it was a couple of minutes before the court case, which he had turned him for. This guy wasn't trying to evade justice or anything like that. But there was SOCU carrying out a function that has absolutely nothing to do with the real reason for which SOCU has been established, but carrying out obviously a politically vindictive function that has to do with the manner in which Paul Slow has been able to expose the government in relation to the Public Service Commission and the manner of conduct, and the Police Service Commission, and the manner of conduct of the president, who sought to have slow promote persons who did not meet the requirements for promotion. And when he failed to get slow to act, he then went ahead and sought to get slow to the way and sought to have those persons um, promoted. So we have a promotion system that is highly biased and discriminatory and therefore poses questions. And in relation to the police, we also saw the question being asked that has not been answered about the interference of the government in the operation of the Police Complaints Commission. The Police Complaints Commission, the commissioner actually indicated that he's not been able to function. And he gave an example of the instance where there was obstruction in him doing his work. And that came up. And there could be no proper answer to that. There is this repeated response that the Police Service Commission operates under some law and the law doesn't provide for anybody to interfere. But the fact of the matter is, the report uh, is that there was interference. And let me say this while it's continuing. A significant thing about this report is the attempt by the government to say, well, these are all spurious claims, that there's no evidence and there's a cabal that is anti-government. And the UN people made it clear. They made it clear that one, they had received information, and two, that they had done due diligence. So they were not just coming based on somebody spuriously making claims against the government, that they had done due diligence. And I know that for a fact because in some of the matters we reported, they told us in no uncertain terms, yes, we've received your report, but we cannot uh, take any action, even ask questions, until we have done due diligence, so that we see in a situation where the UN is not merely uh, posing questions, but they're posing questions on some evidential basis. So, for example, we have the situation of the question about the vice president and corruption.
Yeah.
And the response that we get from that is that no one is reported to the police, so there's nothing to investigate. Now, there are two aspects to that. We all know that the APNU AFC sought in Parliament, of all places, to bring a motion calling for an investigation. And the Speaker of the National Assembly struck it down. So, where is this contention that nobody knows? At the highest level, this matter was uh, brought to the attention with an intention for an investigation. And the Speaker acted against that. But she goes out there now to say, no, no, we don't know about this. No, nobody is reported to the police. Suffice to say that in this country, we've had the cyber laws being used against people in the contention of what they said. So what they said, using some instrument, was seen to be in breach of the cyber laws, and they're brought before the court. And here is something which was equally said in public, equally said in public, with absolutely no response, and a contention that, well, you didn't go report to the police. A lot of those cyber crimes, nobody reports to the police. The police took action because somebody behind the scene told them that action should
Should
be
be.
taken. And so one could conclude that on the corruption issue, they were told that no action should be taken. And when confronted, sought to say, well, there was no report to the police, which is definitely not the case. We
Definitely. Go ahead. Go ahead, Vincent.
have a situation in Guyana where the executive, the government, takes it upon itself to be judge, and jury, and prosecutor. And I'm saying that in relation to GCOM. I hold no brief for the persons charged. But for the government to go continuously go out there saying that what these people have done in a circumstance where the matter has been brought before the court, and the court is still to hear the case or the cases and to make a ruling, but for them to besmirch, people's character in public as if they are the determining factor in terms of what may have occurred in the 2020 elections. Suffice to say that there's much has occurred in the 2020 elections that the government has turned a blind eye on. For example, we all know that in Region 4, the East Bank in particular, that all of the documents that can lend validity to the ballots cast could not be found. And there hasn't been any investigation into that. Nobody's being charged for that. Absolutely no attention to that. But attention to Mingo and people working in GCOM. So why no attention to what occurred on the East Bank? Why no attention to the reports from the chief immigration officer that there were people who were out of the country for whom the available information in GCOM suggests that votes were cast? Why no attention to that? Why would the Attorney General seek to acquire all of the information of allegations of such things? And when acquiring it, says to the public, I'm acquiring this because I want to know what the APNU AFC did to know that people were not present. So in other words, he suggested that the fact that the APNU AFC brought forward this information, that they must have breached some law, interfere with somebody's rights. And so he acquires all of these documents. And then from 2022 to present, goes patently silent when he, in fact, has at his disposal the mechanism in terms of the chief immigration officer and the Ghana police force to interrogate those submissions to see if there's any veracity in the allegations that those documents present the case of thousands of persons who were out of the country and for whom votes were cast. Let's deal with that. So we see here where on one hand a certain course of action is being taken that's in the interest of those who are in power, and not a course of action in the interests of justice. And these are the questions being posed. So when we come to the question of the judiciary, constantly the people ask the question, why hasn't there been the appointment of the Chief Justice and the Chancellor? And there could be no reasonable answer. All is being said, well, the Chief Justice and the Chancellor, they have given rulings that are against the government. They've given rulings that are in favor of the opposition. And therefore, it couldn't mean that we are using these mechanisms to interfere with the justice system because the system is working. And that's the response. The system is working. The fact of the matter is, in our jurisprudence, we have procedures. And those procedures are there to ensure, in fact, that there is no justice is observed. And the extent to which you have an acting chancellor and an acting chief justice, you have put them in a position where they have to look over their backs as they carry it because they have no security of tenure. What is required is security of tenure. Then you can tell me how they are ruling. But
Yes.
you're not doing that and attempting to tell the world that there's no problem. And these people have been appointed for years. but there's no problem. That's what you're saying to the world. So you see here that no proper answers could be proffered. And the reason why no proper answers could be proffered is because what is occurring cannot stand public scrutiny. What is occurring is blatant breach of our democratic principles and human rights infringements. Human rights infringements. You have a case where the director of public prosecution in one period is the person who proffered charges against people, and the government changes, and the same director of public prosecution withdraws the charges.
Charges.
This has happened in more than one instance.
Mhm.
How can you explain that? How can you explain that? What is it about this director of public prosecution that at one time she says these people should be charged, another time she withdraws the charges? On some side of the fence, something is wrong. It could be wrong when she proffered the charges in the first instance, or it could be wrong when she withdraw the charges, but both can't be right.
That's right.
Both can't be right. So clearly, we have problems here with the manner of the administration of justice, as we have seen in that particular circumstance. There are instances where they have said that action has been taken, but we have to note that action was only taken after pressure was applied. So, for example, the instance of the attorney at law who was detained by Suku, they didn't simply take action. Pressure was applied. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, the girl went to the court and got some judgment and all of that. And then action was taken. And we see the nature of the regime even in her case. In her case, the attorney general, who does not have supervisory authority over Soko, claimed he called them and told them to release the girl. So we have a system where these ministers can call bodies that should be acting independently and give them instructions.
There we go.
I'm not making this up. He said that he called them. And he should not be in a position to call them. They should be acting in accordance with the laws of Guyana. And no minister should be calling them to do or to not do. So that in some regards, they're presenting evidence against themselves when they're caught in the vortex. And so we have a proliferation of these matters that have been reported on, and the UN is now saying, tell us about them. And in fact, we should understand the process. The UN received the responses on these matters from the government. And the extent to which the UN is now posing questions is the extent to which they're saying the responses that you gave are unsatisfactory. We need explanations. And we are seeing now that the same way in which the written responses were unsatisfactory, the oral responses are equally unsatisfactory. And in some instances, there's defiance, there's absolutely no response.
And I like the way in which you ended there, Vincent, in the line of work that I do and that you did for part of the time. You go up for your master's thesis or your PhD thesis, you present your written thing, and if it's unsatisfactory, we invite you for an oral defense. And if you fail the oral defense along with the written defense, that's it. You don't get to the and so I like that way in which when in all regards, I think this government has failed. The written response, of course, had holes. That is why they had to go for the oral response. And it doesn't take a professor to see that the oral responses were woefully inadequate. In fact, she had to come back the second day and say, well, I didn't answer this. And because the questions were too much, clearly she went overnight and tried to see if they can pull some things together and so on and so forth. Vincent, where after this hearing, the fight for human rights in Guyana, where does it stand? Is it a shot in the arm in a positive way for the struggle for human rights?
I would say, firstly, I think the Guyanese society itself also recognize that they should not be silent,
Yes,
that they should be vigilant, and that they should make known where there are instances of infringements. That's the first thing. I think those of us in civil society have to continue the work of bringing to the attention, in the first instance, locally, these infringements, asking for redress, and to continue to go beyond the local place, because the world is one community now, and the world has committed itself to certain standards of behavior in government and even at the individual level. And so, where there are breaches, we ought to pursue them as far as they can be pursued. Now, the fact of the matter is that the way the international organizations work, one could see over time, they take some time, but over time, these organizations could determine that there is need for some kind of sanction in relation to the government. So they sometimes would call on government to uh, take certain actions, and if those actions are not taken, then they can get to the point of sanctions. We see the case of our neighbor in Venezuela,
yes,
where not only have they called on Venezuela to take certain actions in relation to elections and other things, including uh, imprisonment and things like that. And with Venezuela's response, we've seen them gone beyond that to impose sanctions, uh, sanctions which are sometimes imposed by member countries of the United Nations. United Nations don't have the same mechanism itself in every instance, but what they do is that they give uh, legitimacy to the sanctions. So we may well be, in some regards, looking down the barrel of a gun if we continue the way that we are conducting uh, local affairs and the way in which we're infringing the human rights. You know, I didn't mention the issue of the Amerindians
right.
and the problem there where the government has is in defiance of the ruling in relation to mining. And what they have done, they said, all right, we 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 have not given these people access to mining as it should have been done. And what they've done now is stop all the mining. So the Amerindians can't mine on lands that belong to them, when the real issue was that there were miners being given permission who should not, other than the Amerindians, who should have not been given permission. So we see these acts of sometimes it's even worse than defiance. It's going to the other end of the totem pole to inflict punishment on those who are seeking justice. And the world no longer necessarily facilitates that. And so Guyana could well see itself um, looking down the barrel of a gun. Look, for example, we saw the case of them asking the question, have you investigated the Thomas, why the US took away our visa? Have you investigated that? Here is your citizen, senior public servant, subjected to some level of penalty and punishment by a foreign state when on official business, and you have gone patently silent on the matter, and she continues to be in your service, right? So you see the kind of inquiry that is taking place, and when possible, action being taken, as was in the case of Roger Khan. We must remember, that this government refused to act on the Roger Khan matter before during, and after. And it's only because of extraterritorial action
Mm-hmm.
that Wajakan was brought to justice. This government refused. And one can only conclude that there's a certain level of complicity. And in fact, Wajakan himself advertised that complicity when he said in a public advertisement that he was acting on behalf of the government in terms of fighting crime. So the evidence is out there. The evidence is out there, and certain levels of action are also out there. Um, the US do not tell you how many visas they haven't issued. They don't tell you, but you could track to see who goes where, and you know that the visas have not been issued or have been taken back from those persons. So that yes, there is the need for continued vigilance on these matters. There is the need for us to reach beyond this state into the international arena of which we are a part. And there is evidence that if we continue down this path, that more and more action will be taken against the perpetrators of the acts of the violation of human rights in Guyana.
Violation of human rights in Guyana. Vincent, I started the program by drawing attention to the fact that we are now a petro state. We are now a different state than we were before oil. And that in itself brings us into greater scrutiny than we would have had before. The government likes to boast about how we are the fastest growing economy in the world and so on and so forth. And without realizing that comes with responsibilities in a way that you could have ducked those responsibilities if you are not the fastest growing economy in the world. There's a way in which you cannot duck them these days. Your comment on that thesis?
Well, we live in an interrelated world, and the extent to which we have gotten oil, and it's a foreign company that's exploiting the oil,
Yes.
and there are lots of foreigners who are now here. What happens here impacts not only here, but it impacts all with whom we have relations at the level of the individuals who are here, at the level of the company which is here, and at the level of the relationships that are a part of the support mechanism for what's happening here. So that we have external stakeholders. Our stakeholders are not just internal stakeholders, we have external stakeholders. The external stakeholders have an interest in the stability in Guyana because instability affects what they're into. And therefore, they will be paying greater interest in what goes on here because what goes on here has greater impact on what goes on there than was previously the case. It has a greater impact. And therefore, out of self interest, let's not fool ourselves. A lot of what will happen in terms of the international community is a question of their own interests. And they feel that what happens here can affect uh, their interests, and therefore they have an interest in ensuring it does not occur. So the extent to which we are the fastest growing economy, the fastest ever uh, oil, 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 um,
Oil state, petrol state.
oil state in terms of its exploration, then we have the greater impact on the world community. For example, the whole question of Ukraine, Russia, production of wheat, production of oil, and the way in which Guyana, given the situation with Russia and the way in which they have sanctions on export of oil, Guyana now, in a sense, has filled the void.
Yes.
Guyana has brought stability to world trade in oil in many regards. And if Guyana becomes unstable, then that can impact the stability of the world trade in oil. And the world trade in oil is at the center of world trade. There's nothing bigger than oil. And so we are in the big league, so to speak. And everything we do, they have an interest in because they have their citizens here who may be affected in the way in which we are affecting our own citizens. We have trade relations which can impact uh, what happens in other countries. We have investment here which can be impacted as well. And so the international community has an interest in Guyana now more than ever before. And so Guyana will come under greater scrutiny and has to be more responsive to the international environment, the world ecosystem, so to speak.
Vincent Alexander, telling it like he tells it whenever he comes here or wherever he goes to comment on these issues. Vincent, on a night of blackout, you've made the supreme sacrifice of rising above the blackout to do your service to your country and your people. Thank you very much.
You're most welcome.
Thank you. Vincent Alexander there. As usual, a wealth of knowledge, a wealth of information, a wealth of analysis. And I know that we were slow. We on this side of the aisle were slow to hold on to the fact that we are the fastest growing economy in the world. We are the fastest growing petrostate. We were slow to hold on to it. But we are holding on to it now. And you see how it is benefiting our struggle. You see how it's benefiting our struggle. And that is why I'm saying that we have to slowly but surely understand the moment that we're in. I want to thank you all so much, those of you who joined us through the blackout from Guyana. Amanza was not able to make it tonight. Clearly, the blackout affected her. Hopefully, we don't have blackout tomorrow night. Tomorrow night, Dr. Vincent Adams is going to be here. And Minister Teixeira lied on Vincent, and she sought to walk it back the day after, and so on. Dr. Vincent Adams is going to be here tomorrow. And if there's not blackout and Amanza does not have a prior engagement, we are going to have Amanza tomorrow night. So though we miss her tonight because of the blackout, but once there is no blackout tomorrow night, we hopefully will have her along with Dr. Vincent Adams. Thank you all so much. Thank you all so much. You all come out in big numbers tonight, big numbers, you know. People start talking about ratings for our programs and so on. We are no longer social media. There is now, the gap is closing between social media and the traditional media. The gap is closing. And thanks to you all, because you all have legitimized these programs. These programs would not have legitimacy without your input. Thanks to all of you. Dennis Atwell, thanks very much for always being here. Rhonda Lane, thanks very much. Yes, Rhonda, you were part of that cybercrime, a victim of the cybercrime. Marlene, Carlos, Dennis Wilson, Lester Beckles, Yvonne, all of you, Carl Miller, all of you, thank you all so much. And so many others who are on, all 1,500 and more of you who are live here tonight. all 1,500 of you who are live here tonight. You all are making this possible. Love you all, love you all, love you all so much. And I'll see you all tomorrow night when we come for another edition of Politics 101. Say good night. Say good night to Mr. Duncan for me. And some of you are going to go later on to Mr. Ben Sharp. Say good night to there I was going to say. Good night to Mr. Duncan and good night to Mr. Ben Sharp for me. I'm signing off now, coming back tomorrow at 7 o'clock. 7 o'clock sharp tomorrow night. As we would normally say in Guyana, 7 p.m. tomorrow night. It's just your call emphasis.